Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES for 10% off any purchase over $10. If you use that promo code between now and January 28th, you will automatically be entered in a drawing to win a Ravnica Allegiance booster box. Check out the description below for details. Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to the start of the second week of official Ravnica Allegiance previews. Again, we have a lot of cards to recap and analyze today, so I want to get into it pretty quick here. As always, if you check out the description below, you will find the sources for the cards. So if you want to know which content creator featured which card, all that information is down there for you. Quickly before we get started though, just a fast reminder, if you check out the description below, you'll find a few ways to support the channel. One of which is our Patreon page. You're also going to find links to products on Amazon down below. If you make any purchases on Amazon, once you go through that initial link, we'll get a small percentage. Finally, Flipside Gaming still offering a promo code for our viewers, and they still have some Ravnica Allegiance booster boxes available on their website. With the promo code, it's not a bad deal. You might want to check that out if you're still looking for one. With that being said, though, thank you not only to the folks that look at those links, but to each and every one of you. Y'all make the channel what it is. Let's get into today's cards. Archway Angel. This is a white and 5 Angel, uncommon 3/4 with flying, and when this enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life for each gate you control. So, definitely not something I'm interested in playing in Standard, but in Limited, it might have its place. Sometimes you just need a flyer. A 3/4 flyer for 6 isn't very economical, it's not where you want to be, but every once in a while, especially in Sealed, sometimes you just have to play it. Now, if you had some gates, it's a little better. I mean, if you had 2 gates in play and you played this, you get a 3/4 flyer as well as 4 life. That's not bad for 6 mana. I don't mind that. Now, this is one of those Gate Matters cards. We saw these in Guilds of Ravnica as well. Basically, the idea here is if your draft isn't going so well and you can't get into a guild, maybe you can do 4 or 5 color good stuff. And if that's the case, you're able to grab all the gates. And then they have some of these Gate Matters cards that kind of reward you a little bit. Never really is where you want to be, but every once in a while you might find yourself there. Ministrant of Obligation. This is a white and 2 human cleric uncommon afterlife 2/2/1. Decent limited card. Not a lot to say about this one. Usually not a huge fan of 3 drops that are 2/1s because yes, this will certainly trade down most of the time. However, in this case, I'm not too sad when it trades down because I'm getting 2 1/1 flyers. Never underestimate how good 1/1 flyers can be. This is a perfect card for the Orzhov builds, and even if I'm not playing Orzhov in draft or sealed, this is still a fine creature. This is a Chinese simplified language preview, loosely translated United Stand. It's a white and 2 instant. Creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. Addendum. If you cast this spell during your main phase, put a +1/+1 counter on each of those creatures, and they gain vigilance until end of turn. Wow, okay, this is a no fooling around instant here. I've said this before, I really like the addendum mechanic. It makes you think about your plays in these colors, and I think that's pretty interesting. So, do I actually play this in Standard? I think there's a chance that I do. Yes, it is dependent on board state, and sometimes it's a deal breaker for many of these cards. But this one's relatively cheap, and I think it just needs to be in the right deck. If you're able to create some sort of Azorius Tempo deck, then, yeah, you know what? This is not a bad card. One of the things that makes me feel like it is perhaps bound for Standard is the fact that it interacts so well with Dovin. This could really power up Dovin, which is kind of cool if you use this on your turn. And Dovin can add to this card's power by making Thopters. So that's one thing to consider. But aside from that, the flexibility is nice. You can use this defensively. Maybe your opponent tries to use a sweep spell against you and you're able to protect your stuff for just 3 mana. That's kind of awesome. Or you can use it offensively. Like I mentioned, whether you have Dovin or you don't, this could sometimes close out a game for you. It's a very powerful effect. So the only thing that would keep this out of Standard is if that type of deck just isn't feasible in the meta. But I do think as long as that deck can hold some ground, you'll see this in Standard. Aside from that, in Limited, this is a great card for you. It's a rare, so it should be good. But this is definitely first pickable in a pack. This is a monocolor card which will keep you open in draft. And remember, draft as well as sealed are both creature-centric formats. Overall, I really like this one. This one comes to us from a Korean language preview, loosely translated Essence Capture. 2 blue, instant, counter target creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature you control. Another card that I do think could see some Standard play, just simply because Essence Scatter currently sees Standard play in the blue Tempo deck. If that deck can hang around, which I think it can, this could just replace Essence Scatter within that deck. And sometimes that deck will run a copy in the main, like 2 in the sideboard. I could see this basically being an upgrade in a mono blue deck since it doesn't feel the sting of the double blue casting cost. So I do think it will see at least a little bit of Standard play. In Limited, it's a good card. It's going to be good in Azorius builds because it's controlling. It will be good in Simic builds because it can grant a +1/+1 counter, although sometimes it could be a Nombo with Adapt. Just depends on what you're trying to do. It might not make every build, but I think many times you'll be happy to run this in Sealed or Draft. Mesmerizing Benthid. This one is a mythic, 2 blue and 3 octopus 4/5. When this enters the battlefield, create 2/0/2 blue illusion creature tokens with. Whenever this creature blocks a creature, that creature doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. This also has hexproof as long as you control an illusion. Okay, so you might look at this card and say, it's a mythic rare, not a rare. It doesn't seem really flashy or maybe as crazy as some of the other mythics that we've seen over the course of the last week or so. However, there's tons of economy behind this card. Don't be fooled by it. 4/5 plus the 2/0/2 tokens for just 5 mana. Not to mention, this will be hexproof as long as the tokens can survive or you have another illusion in play. And then the tokens themselves have an ability attached to them as well, which gums up the ground, which is what blue wants to do many times. There's a lot happening here for 5 mana, and because of that, I do think it could see some standard play. Maybe I would want to try this out in the mono blue tempo deck, kind of see how it plays there. Or maybe I could brew something entirely different. This makes some cards that already exist feel a lot better, things like Narcomoeba or Jace Cunning Castaway. Now, I don't know if that would get there, but something to think about at least. Maybe start brewing a little bit and just kind of see how it works out. Now, beyond standard, I do think this is, of course, an amazing card in Draft or Sealed. It's a mythic. I mean, it should be. Easily first pickable. It's even monocolors, so it doesn't necessarily tie you into a strategy right away. It's good on its own, really, no matter what you're doing. It is double blue, maybe a little harder to splash, but other than that, you're going to love this card anytime you're able to get it on the battlefield. It really could shift the board state quite a bit, actually, for just 5 mana. It is going to be awesome whenever you do get the rare opportunity to play with it. Here's a Chinese simplified preview card. It's an uncommon, loosely translated Sailing Salamander. It costs 1 blue. It's a creature, Salamander Drake. Flying, 1/1. Pay a blue and 7, adapt 4. This ability costs 1 less to cast for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. Alright, this is actually pretty solid. It's a 1-drop, 1/1 flyer. But you know what? In the right deck, it's not going to take too long before this thing becomes a 5/5 flyer. And that's actually sort of crazy. Think about the current Drake decks. Now, I don't know if I would just plug this into a current Drake build. It's a little bit of a Nombo with the Phoenix because the Phoenix wants to use those jumpstart spells and such. I might tweak it a little bit, but I do think it's very standard playable once you kind of figure out the right formula there. Even beyond standard, I would consider this for modern. I mean, Phoenix decks have done well in modern. Again, I don't think you just plug this into the Phoenix deck, but once you get into modern, you don't have to rely so much on those jumpstart spells. You have a lot of cheap spells you can use. And I do think there might be a place for this in modern, believe it or not. Perhaps even other formats as well. I'd at least want to test it out. So I do think this is a very powerful uncommon. What about limited? Yeah, this thing is a first pickable uncommon in limited. Now, granted, you're not going to be able to exploit the ability quite as much, most likely. You'll have more creatures and probably not quite as many instants and sorceries. At least it feels that way in this set. Although certain decks will be able to pull the adapt off quicker than others, I'm sure. But regardless, I think you can still find tons of value with this card. It's going to be fantastic for Draft and Sealed too. Skatewing Spy. Blue and 3, Vidalcan Rogue, Mutant Uncommon 2/3, blue and 5, adapt 2. Each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has flying. So that's actually kind of interesting because look at it this way. This is more of a limited card than anything. I think it's a little too mana intensive for standard. But in Draft or Sealed, paying 4 for a 2/3 doesn't feel great, but later in the game, making this a 4/5 flyer? Alright, now we're talking a little bit, even though, yes, it does cost a lot of mana to do that. 4/5 flyers are never bad. Very sturdy, can put damage across, and then any other creature with a +1/+1 counter also gets flying. In the right build, that could be game ending. This is a very high pick uncommon in Draft, maybe even first pickable in some packs, depending on what your rare is, if your rare is a little more niche. So this is one to pay attention to. It could help you close out games in a Simic build. Or maybe I splash blue in my Gruul build just to play this so my Riot creatures that decide to get a +1/+1 counter can fly later. Orzhov Racketeers. This is going to cost a black and 4 creature human rogue uncommon 3/2. When this deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card, Afterlife 2. I don't see a lot of people discarding cards to this, honestly. This is a 5 casting cost 3/2. That sounds horrible, but I said this earlier. Don't underestimate the power of 1/1 flyers, especially in mass. So, do I actually play this card in Draft or Sealed? Yeah, you know what? I probably do. 3/2, it's gonna be trading down, and maybe I just trade for a 2/2 for 2 or something like that. but I get the 2 flyers, and that makes all the difference here. I'm actually going to play this card more often than not. Might not make every build, obviously, but it's not bad. Burn Bright. It's a red and 2, instant common. Creatures you control get +2/+0 till end of turn. Good limited card here. It's not going to do much outside of limited. This is a little bit like Trumpet Blast, but you can use it defensively, which I like that change. It just gives you more flexibility. Trumpet Blast would buff attacking creatures, and sometimes a new player might not read the card carefully and try to use it defensively and really get blown out, and that was kind of awkward. So I don't mind that they changed this. I do think it makes the card better generally. And in Limited, you're going to be happy to play this in both Rakdos builds, which of course are aggressive, and they need to push across a lot of damage later in the game when they're running out of gas. This could close out a game if you go wide enough. Or it's good in Gruul builds where you might have some big trample creatures, and you could close out a game by just trampling over your opponent. Really, really solid common for those type of builds. Immolation Shaman. It's a red and 1 Viashino Shaman, rare 1/3. Whenever an opponent activates an ability of an artifact, creature, or land that isn't a mana ability, this will deal 1 damage to that player. Pay 2 red and 3, and this gets +3/+3 and menace until end of turn. So notice that you could actually pump that more than 1 time. So if you had 10 mana, it would be +6/+6 in menace. So that's kind of crazy. So is this a good card at the end of the day? I think for Limited, it's pretty decent. It's a 2-drop 1/3, and whenever your opponent is forced into activating an ability on one of their artifact creatures or lands, which of course is not a mana ability, they take a point of damage. There could be times that might even be relevant with Spectacle. But what I really like about this is the fact that I can give it the +3/+3 and menace for 5 mana later on in the game, or like I said, maybe even more. It's a decent card early, it's a decent card late. It's one of those cards that just kind of makes sense in Limited, right? It's a workhorse card, not necessarily anything truly amazing all the time, but it has flexibility, and that can go a long way. Is it always the first pick in a draft pack? Maybe not always. There's some good uncommons. We've seen some today that I might even take over this, but I don't think it's a bad card by any means. When it comes to Standard, maybe it sees a little sideboard play. This reminds me a little of Harsh Mentor. It doesn't hit as hard as Harsh Mentor, but it does have that other ability, even though it is kind of expensive when you're talking Standard. But it's interesting. If there's a deck out there with a lot of activated abilities, I would consider having this in my sideboard. Gruul Beastmaster, another card for Limited here. It's a green and 3 human shaman uncommon 2/2 with Riot. Whenever Gruul Beastmaster attacks another target creature you control gets +X/+0 until end of turn, where X is Gruul Beastmaster's power. So basically, you either get a 2/2 haste creature with that ability or a 3/3 with that ability. Of course, if you have the 3/3, the ability gets a little bit better. So you do have a decision to make depending on board state, and I do like those type of cards. The more decisions I can make on my cards, the more I feel I'm going to be able to make my cards work for me. So that's part of the reason I really enjoy the Riot mechanic generally. Now, other than that, at face value, it doesn't feel great to spend 4 for a 2/2, but I do think the upsides here are enough to actually make this playable in Draft or Sealed. Not necessarily a super high draft pick for me, but if I'm in Gruul especially, being able to buff a trample creature with this down the road or something like that, I think could be quite good. Sauroform Hybrid. This is a green and 1 common human lizard warrior 2/2. Pay 2 green and 4, adapt 4. This is a real solid limited card. If you watch these videos, you know what I love. I love bears with upside, and this is definitely a bear with upside. The downside of many 2/2s for 2 is later in the game they don't do a whole lot for you. They almost feel like a dead draw for the most part. But cards like this are good early and they're good late. If I get this on turn 2, it's a great curve filler. It's doing everything I needed to do early on in the game for Draft or Sealed. It keeps me alive. It keeps me with some board presence until later on when I can get to my bigger things. Or if I do draw this later, I pour the extra mana into it and I have a 6/6. It doesn't have trample or anything, unfortunately, but it's still sizable. And again, it can just help you get to your next play and keep you alive long enough. Or if you're already winning, it's still a sizable creature. Maybe you can slam the door on a game. I also really like the adapt mechanic generally because it does make combat a little more difficult for your opponent. Never underestimate that either. For me, this is a relatively high pick common. Maybe I can grab one of these in the middle of a pack and draft. This one comes to us from a Chinese simplified preview, loosely translated Silhana Wayfinder. Green and 1 Elf Scout 2/1. When this enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature or land card and put it on the top of your library. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Alright, so it's a little slower than some other cards that are like this we've seen in the past because the card goes on top of your deck as opposed to in your hand. However, you're getting to choose between a creature or land in the top 4. Makes it pretty difficult to miss with this most of the time, which is kind of nice. And you're getting a 2/1 creature for 2, so you're getting decent board presence as well. So put it all together, and I think there's actually some decent economy behind this card, even though it does at first glance feel a little slow. I think it's actually still good enough to see play in Standard, as a matter of fact. It also works pretty well with like the Explorer mechanic if you can set up the top of your deck. That's kind of interesting. And like I said, it just feels like it's doing enough for 2 mana. I also mentioned yesterday that if you wanted to see a ramp deck do well in Standard, it needed a lot of pieces to help you smooth out your draws. Well, this is a piece. I don't think this alone is going to make a ramp deck viable, but it is a piece, and as we see more cards this week, who knows, maybe it can get there. So that's something to keep an eye out for. In Limited, I think this is very, very solid. Another high pick uncommon for me. Monocolor card that's going to smooth out my draws. Early in the game, I grab that land I need, especially if I'm getting a little greedier on color. That could be good. Later in the game, I get the heat. I get the creature I need. Either way, even though it's a little slower than some of the other Wayfinders we've seen in the past, still real good. Trollbred Guardian. Okay, here's that trample creature we wanted for Limited, and it kind of looks like a Battletoad. Green and 4. Troll Frog Warrior. Uncommon, 5/5. Pay a green and 2, adapt 2. Each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has trample. Now this is a little too expensive and dependent on board state for Standard. If you're playing Standard, there's a lot of better cards you could be dumping your mana into. But in Draft or Sealed, this card is going to be awesome for you. In Draft, this is another relatively high pick uncommon, nice monocolor card that has a big presence either by itself or with other creatures. And this makes combat very difficult on your opponent. Will you pull the trigger? Won't you pull the trigger? Making this potentially a 7/7 trample creature. Even the base casting cost is economical. I mean, a green and 4 for a 5/5, it's only 1 on color. Those are pretty good stats, and then you have the ability later, of course, to turn this into a 7/7 trample creature, and then also anything else with a +1/+1 counter could get trample. That could just close out a game if you time it right and you have enough +1/+1 counter synergies in your deck. This will be good in Simic with Adapt. This will be good in Gruul with Riot. Overall, very strong Limited card again. Combine Guildmage. Green, blue, Merfolk Wizard. It's another Merfolk. Uncommon 2/2. Pay a green and 1, tap. This turn, each creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. Blue 1 and tap. Move a +1/+1 counter from target creature you control onto another target creature you control. Let's talk Standard first, since this is a Merfolk Wizard, and that actually could be relevant, you would think, but unfortunately, I think this card's just too slow. A 2/2 for 2, those abilities are nice, but they're just not happening fast enough for me, unfortunately. Yeah, you know what, I can go ahead and get an extra +1/+1 counter on one of my creatures coming into play for 2 mana and tapping this, but I don't know how relevant that's always going to be. Will I have the mana to do that? Secondly, moving a counter, that does make combat a little more difficult. I do like that, but for 2 mana again and tapping this, it just doesn't feel like enough for Standard. In Limited, I think it's okay. There might be better cards you can grab at Uncommon, but it's still a 2/2 for 2 at the end of the day. And again, just making the combat math difficult with that second ability is interesting to me. The first ability is kind of weird though, because it's kind of a Nombo with Adapt, which is strange, but I'm more so probably just going to play this for the second ability. I feel like there's more Simic cards we haven't seen yet. There's got to be some better ways to remove counters for profit. Now, if we saw something like that later on, then maybe this card does get a little bit better. I'll just take a moment and let you absorb that art for a second. Yeah, that's totally a puppet of Jace there. Cult Guildmage, black, red, human shaman, uncommon 2/2, black and 3 tap. Target player discards a card. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery. Red, tap, and this will deal 1 damage to target opponent or planeswalker. Notice it can force you to discard a card if that is ever relevant. This Guildmage also is a little underwhelming for me. It's fine in Limited. If I'm playing with a lot of Spectacle, I will be happy to play with this because it can turn on Spectacle for just 1 red and tapping it. That's not bad. At the end of the day, it's still a 2/2 for 2, even if it is 2 different colors. We've seen this all before. The discard effect also can be very relevant when it comes to Draft or Sealed. It's just a slow card because it taps and it does cost 4 mana to activate that first ability. It's not horrible, but it's not great either. Not something you're going to try to play in Standard, but it's decent for Limited for sure. Domri, Chaosbringer. Okay, finally we get a look at the Domri Planeswalker here. +1, add red or green if that mana is spent on a creature spell. It gains Riot. -3, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal up to 2 creature cards from among them and put them into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. -8, you get an emblem. That emblem says at the beginning of each end step, create a 4/4 red and green beast creature token with trample. I'll cut to the chase. I think this is a very, very solid Planeswalker. Forecasting costs 5 loyalty, quickly going up to 6. That +1 can also ramp you a little bit, and any creature you play with that mana will get Riot. Many times that will just mean it has haste when it comes to these colors, but you got the option of haste or a +1/+1 counter, and either could be relevant at different times. Also remember, Riot can stack, so that's kind of cool if you do have other creatures that already have Riot in your deck. This is a pretty good start, right? Now, let's cut to the downside real quick. Domri can't protect himself just right off the bat, like he can't make a token or something like that. However, the -3 tries to do it kind of in a roundabout way. Might take a turn or so, but basically, if you construct your deck properly, many times this is going to be a draw 2 for -3. That's also really solid. And it is getting to creatures, so obviously you can play those creatures at some point to hopefully protect Domri. So it does get there, kind of, sort of, it's just a little slow. The -8, I don't usually like to evaluate Planeswalkers on their ultimate, but this one's just fine. Remember, it's nothing crazy, it's not going to close out a game right away, but it does trigger on the end step, so you do get a token the turn that you use it. I like that. And it's not going to be too hard to get there. I mean, you start off with 5, you go up to 6 right away, you're just a couple turns now away from getting to the -8. And if your opponent can't do something about it, either defeat you in the air or find a way around all these beast creatures, then they're probably in trouble relatively quickly, right? You're getting a lot here for 4 mana. I do think just because of that, this is going to see standard play. If you did have any questions whether the Gruul colors would be able to bring some kind of stompy deck to standard, this does make me feel a lot better about that possibility now. This card is a powerhouse. I don't have to say this. Limited, it's a bomb, right? Like, it's a mythic rare. You're not going to see it a whole ton, but it's amazing. Like, don't not first pick this in a draft just because it's a gold card. You can always splash one of the other 2 colors. It's going to be incredible for you. Galloping Lizrog. Blue, green, 3, frog, lizard. It's an uncommon 3/3 with trample. When this enters the battlefield, you may remove any number of +1/+1 counters from among creatures you control. If you do, put twice that many +1/+1 counters on this. Remember earlier when I said if there's a way to remove counters off cards for value, then that maybe that Guild Mage would get a little bit better and Adapt would get a little bit better? Yeah, well, that was foreshadowing for this one. Now, this is not going to be great in Standard because it's a little too expensive and dependent on what's going on the battlefield. But in Limited, if I'm in Simic or even playing Gruul and then just splashing the blue, this could be a really solid card for me. Now, the best way to use this is you take an Adapt creature or 2 or 3 or how many you have, remove their +1/+1 counters, throw them on here, actually twice as many on here, and then you can at some point later readapt those other Adapt creatures and make them large again too. That is awesome value. For 5 mana, again, a 3/3 with trample for 5 doesn't feel great, so you want to make sure you have +1/+1 counter generation in your deck before you go all in on this card. But as long as you have at least some in Drafter Sealed, you're going to be really, really happy with this. This could close out a game if your opponent doesn't have an answer. It could be a real big play, no doubt. Acrobat. I love the names of these Rakdos cards this time. Red, black, and 1, human rogue, uncommon 2/3, spectacle cost of a black and red. Pay a black, it gains death touch until end of turn. Pay a red, it gets +2/-2 till end of turn, so effectively maybe becoming a 4/1 on the fly. Now this is another limited card for me, but I do think it's a very good one in an aggressive build. I like the fact that your opponent is going to be guessing about what you might do when you attack with this. It's a 2/3, you can turn on death touch, or you can just go ahead and make it a 4/1. So if they decide, you know what, I'm not going to block this because I don't want to lose this creature, well, they might be taking 4 damage if that's the case. Do they risk the 4 damage? Do they lose the creature? It makes for some tough decisions, and I like that a lot in a card that only costs me 3 and has some pretty decent base stats too as a 2/3 generally. Not to mention the spectacle cost might help me get this out a little bit quicker, and there's nothing wrong with that. Or even later in the game, it's not necessarily a matter of getting it out quicker, but perhaps keeping some resources back to be able to turn on the death touch, or at least threaten to be able to do that and use it defensively. So yeah, this is another pretty high uncommon pickup for me in a draft, I think. Maybe middle to higher middle portion of the pack. Kia's Wrath. We got a 4 mana board sweep here. It is a little color intensive though. 2 white, 2 black. Rare, sorcery, destroy all creatures. You gain life equal to the number of creatures you control that were destroyed this way. Notice it is your creatures, not opponent's creatures, but you might gain a little life here. So that's kind of nice. If you have to lose something, at least you get something out of it. Alright, the downside. Yes, it's a big glaring one. 2 white, 2 black. It is very color intensive, so basically I don't expect to see this in Modern because I could use Damnation or Wrath of God there. Now in Standard, I don't have Damnation, I don't have Wrath of God, so I'm going to use this most likely and be pretty happy with it. Remember, the last 5 Shocklands are coming in with this set too. That's really going to help with color fixing, so it does make this very, very playable. Where do I want to play this? Well, maybe in a control build like an Esper control deck or something like that. Or maybe, just maybe, if the Afterlife or Aristocrats deck could get there, then this is a great way to find value. I blow up my own stuff and they turn into 1/1 flyers, I gain life, and I just keep going. My opponent loses everything. That could be kind of awesome, right? So I do think this is something that we will be seeing in Standard. In Limited, you got 2 problems. It's a rare, you're not going to see it a lot, and then secondly, again, is the casting cost. If you don't think your deck can use this consistently, then you might want to skip it, but if you feel like you're going to be able to cast this, then I would put it in the deck. Yes, I realize sometimes you might be ahead and you don't need this when you draw it, and that never feels good, but when you're behind, this could catch you up, and again, it's going to work great with Afterlife. Rakdos Roustabout. This is a red, a black, and 1 Ogre Warrior, common 3/2, and when this becomes blocked, it deals 1 damage to the player or planeswalker it's attacking. So, another limited card that's just fine. Here's the thing with this one, though. If I'm not really deep into Spectacle in my deck, I don't want to play this. A 3/2 for 3 is going to trade down a lot of the time. That ability isn't all that impressive to me. Now, if I have a lot of Spectacle cards in my deck, then this still will turn on Spectacle, even if my opponent does block it and kill it. So, maybe it will be worth it in those type of builds, but it's not always going to make my cut. Savage Smash, green, red, 1, sorcery, common, target creature you control gets +2/+2 till end of turn. It fights target creature you don't control. So it's a little too slow being a sorcery and a little too dependent on board state for Standard, but this is going to be really solid in Drafter Sealed. It's nice removal for sure. Yes, sorcery speed isn't such a big deal when it comes to the limited environment. Makes sense, of course, in Gruul colors too. You might be able to use this on a trampled creature, and even if it took damage in the fight and you're going to lose the creature, it could still attack in for a big turn. This one comes to us from a Chinese Simplified Language preview, and it's an uncommon Sphinx of New Prov. 2 white, 2 blue, Sphinx, flying, vigilance 4/3. Spells that your opponent casts that target this cost 2 more to cast. Alright, so it's a part of this uncommon double color cycle, and it's okay. It's not an amazing one, but it's not a bad one. I'm not going to play this in Standard, but in Limited, it's alright. If I can cast this, I'll be happy to run it. 4/3 makes it feel a little fragile, but it does have flying, so that evasion is nice. It does have vigilance, and that will come into play at least occasionally. And what makes it a little tougher is the fact that if your opponent is trying to use a spell to destroy it, like a direct damage spell, then they do have to pay 2 more. So it might keep it alive for like an additional turn sometimes, and that might be good enough. Ultimately, it just comes down to, can you cast it in your Drafter Sealed deck? If you're comfortable with the 2 white and the 2 blue, go for it. This one comes to us from a Portuguese language preview, Spiral Engineer, and it is an uncommon. Blue, green, and 1, creature of Vedalken Wizard, tap to add a green and blue to your mana pool. It's a 1/1. This is an interesting mana dork for 3, but it's only a 1/1, so that does feel a little too slow for Standard, especially in a world where Goblin Chainwhirler exists. This is another limited card, but I do think it's a good one, and I could see myself picking it relatively high in a pack. It's a strong uncommon. Mana dorks are always going to be good for you, this one no exception. Even if I'm not completely into Simic colors, I could splash one or the other for this. I still think it's going to be good enough to ramp me out into some bigger plays. Syndicate Guildmage. It's a white and black human cleric uncommon 2/2. Pay a white and 1 and tap. Tap target creature with power 4 or greater. Black and 4 and tap, and this will deal 2 damage to target opponent or planeswalker. So this is another Guildmage, which is too slow for Standard, but will be just fine in some limited builds. It's Orzhov colors this time around, and a 2/2 for 2 is just fine, even if it is 2 different colors. Those are okay base stats, and those abilities are good for what Orzhov's trying to do. They're trying to make the game go long. They're a little more controlling and methodical. They're trying to win slowly but surely over time. They're attacking in with a lot of 1/1 flyers and such. And then when that strategy dries up for whatever reason, you can go to something like this. The first ability will protect you in a board stall, or maybe let you get more damage across in a board stall. The second ability will definitely help in a board stall to make sure you can close out the game at times. Overall, a fine card for the Orzhov strategy. Nothing crazy though. Theater of Horrors. Red, black, and 1. It's an enchantment rare. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. During your turn, if an opponent lost life this turn, you may play cards exiled with Theater of Horrors. Red and 3, Theater of Horrors deals 1 damage to target opponent or planeswalker. Couple things to note here. First off, you can only dip into those exile cards if it's your turn. So if your opponent gets damaged on their turn, you can't use an exiled instant, for example. Secondly, this doesn't make the cards go away at the end of turn or anything like that. These cards just keep piling up and you can use them as time goes on. Alright, there's a lot happening here for 3 mana. This card, I'll just cut to the chase. I do think it will see standard play. Here's what I like about it. Rakdos aggro decks, you know their biggest weakness is sometimes they just run out of gas. They have a great start, they put across a lot of damage, but then they can't close out the game. This is going to help you keep the hits coming. Simply on each of your upkeeps, this is going to exile a card. And as long as I can still do damage in some way, shape, or form, which does include this card, although paying 4 to do the damage might not always be the best thing in the world, but sometimes it will be good enough. But if I can do that damage, I get access to more cards. That is going to be key. And it is play and not cast, so I do get access to maybe a land even. That might be good enough sometimes, or at least I feel like I'm getting something out of it all the time. Now, if it's not a land and I can use it to cast a creature and just keep going with my board presence, or maybe a damage spell and just go to the face, yeah, that's actually kind of awesome for just 3 mana. Typically, Rakdos decks like this, I would say I don't want to play an enchantment that does nothing on turn 3. I want to keep the pressure on, but you don't have to play this on turn 3. Like, you have this in your hand, you just keep playing creatures. When you start running out of gas, that's when you play this card. Then hopefully you can recover. So even though, yes, it does slow down the aggression a little bit, and I don't love that, I think the upside is worth the downside here because the card is just so good generally. You can maybe even close out a game with that last ability if it comes down to the wire at the end. Draft and Sealed, yeah, this is an incredible rare. The mana sink on this alone makes it great for the limited formats, especially in a board stall, of course. It could help you just pull ahead and win a game. But aside from that, of course, seeing extra cards is always going to be good too. This next card is a Chinese simplified preview. It is a rare, and loosely translated, Prepare and Perform. Prepare is going to cost you 2 black-red hybrid mana. It's an instant. Target creature gets +3/-3 until end of turn. Perform, red, black, and 4 instant. Destroy target non-basic land. Perform deals 2 damage to target opponent or planeswalker. Okay, the second side of the card isn't all that good. It's very expensive. It's kind of interesting that it's instant land destruction for non-basic lands, but yeah, it's costing you 6. I'm not too concerned about that. Every once in a while, I'll be surprised and it might come in handy, but I'm really playing this card for the first side, that's the Prepare side. Basically, it's a removal spell for a 3 or less toughness creature. Even gets around indestructible, that's kind of cool. And sometimes, just sometimes, I might use it on one of my own creatures to pump the power, as long as it can, of course, survive the toughness dip of 3. So you get some versatility there. It doesn't cost all that much to activate it. You have some flexibility with hybrid mana. I do think this actually could see standard play just as a removal spell more than anything. Then every once in a while, maybe some of these other advantages could come into play randomly. In Draft and Sealed, this is also an awesome spell. In Draft, this is easily first pickable. Again, just simply think of this as a removal spell. That's what you're going to do with it 99% of the time. The hybrid mana is kind of nice. It leaves you at least sort of open when it comes to early picking this in a draft pack. And every once in a while, when you least expect it, you might actually want to buff your own creature or destroy a non-basic land. Also, when you destroy the land, doing 2 damage to the opponent could turn on some spectacle, but at that point you already paid 6 mana, so I don't know how relevant that will usually be. Okay, this card is just nuts. Warrant and Warden, the left side's an instant, the right side's a sorcery. It's a rare. The Warrant side is what's really impressed me. 2 hybrid mana, white-blue. Instant, put target attacking or blocking creature on top of its owner's library. Warden, blue, white, and 3, sorcery. Create a 4/4 white and blue Sphinx creature token with flying and vigilance. The right side's good. I mean, making a Sarah Angel type creature, there's nothing wrong with that. It will be just fine for you as an option. But look at that first side. Imagine putting this in a mono blue deck, for example. I mean, this is premium blue removal. It's good white removal too, but this is premium for blue. That tempo that you're going to get from this, incredible for 2 mana. I am really impressed with this one. This will see plenty of standard play. It's going to be in white decks, blue decks, combinations of the two, I have no doubt, just because it's that solid. And again, every once in a while, the Warden side will come in handy, I'm sure, especially if you're ahead or something. But for the most part, this card gets played because of Warrant, and I think it gets played a lot. Limited, this card's going to be awesome. In Draft, first pickable. It's a rare. You won't see it all that much. But this is premium removal. And again, the Warden side will be even better in Sealed or Draft than it is in Standard, so that's kind of nice too. Amazing card here. This is one of the best we've seen. Alright, with that being said, those are the cards for today. We're going to be back tomorrow recapping everything that happens within the next 24 hours, so I will see you then. But until next time, Hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible through the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page, as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.